So you may recall that in a recent episode of the H3X podcast, Dave and I were talking about an upcoming training that he was doing in Oklahoma City for strategy coordinators. Well, that training happened. In this episode, he and I, together with a couple other friends, Matt Foshi and Kyle Pearson, are going to talk through how that went and what Dave learned. Coming up. Hey there, guys. Welcome back to the H3X podcast. My name is Mark Gehring, and together with your host, Dave Miller, we explore the head, the heart, and the hands of the multiplying church and her leaders. And as I shared in the intro in this episode, Dave is going to be in the hot seat, and we're going to ask him some questions about what he learned through putting together this strategy coordinator training in Oklahoma City. They had 37 participants come, which is a really great turnout in terms of numbers and just some of what the fruit that's already beginning to come out of that looked like. So we're going to ask him some questions around how that went and what he might do differently next time. And I think it may be helpful for you to be a fly on the wall as you hear this conversation. So here's Dave.
So what were the breakthroughs?
One of the biggest ones was after Mark got done sharing his Queen's case study, the whole room kind of in sync, kind of understood it at the same time. And then Brian King said, I've always thought about the 5 and 5 as being something I have to do as an individual. Mm-hmm. And he was like, but Mark's doing it as a team. And then your CFC is your contribution to what the team's 5x5 is. And the whole room was just like, right. Mm-hmm. That was one of the major takeaways, is when everybody realized that they didn't personally have to have this audacious 5x5, and then another person has to have their 5x5, or another person that as a group, the team can have a 5 and 5, and then I'm contributing something. I have a CFC within that, and somebody else may have a CFC within that, but together we're doing it. And I was like, they just made the team jump in that moment in their thinking, which I thought was huge. So that was really fun. Brian King articulated it to the group really well.
Yeah, that's good. We were having that same conversation too. And I think people look at it as, this is what I have to go after, but you're really prioritizing the gaps with the 5x5, with the posture of, I'm going to give this away as soon as someone says, hey, that's a priority for me. So it's having that focus of those 5 biggest gaps with, 1 or 2 of those is something that you do the 3 ways of movement in. And anytime someone says, hey, I've got a burden for that gap with that people group, it's like, great, it's yours, and you can, it's more of like a campaigning list. So that's really good. Yeah. I think people are getting stuck on, this is what I have to do personally.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really good to kind of see just the idea that I'm focused on one and I'm campaigning the others, but somebody else on my team might be focused on one of the others while they campaign mine, Yeah.
And they may not even be on your team. Yeah. Maybe somebody within the network in the city that says, that's a burden for me. And then you're like, great, let's coalition around it. That's cool. What else?
I think one of the other big ones was just everybody realizing that when we talk about plugger, Earl Peg, whatever other arrangement you want to do, that essentially each of those are just barriers for the gospel, and they can help you identify where the barriers are, that the order of them is really not as important as the fact that each of those 7 represent a barrier to the gospel. And the more you put those together, the bigger the barrier to the gospel has to be. So whenever we're trying to look for where the gaps are in the city, those 7 help us kind of narrow down where it's going to be. And if you again, Brian brought it up, but he said, right now, season of life with his family, geography is his primary, it's his primary category in Earl Peg or plugger, whichever way you want to say the acronym. because of where he is, he's going to be in Tulsa, and there's not a whole lot else he's going to be able to do in terms of travel. And so then he can go, well, if geography is the limiting factor for me, the boundary for me, then the other ones can help me figure out what inside of my geography I should be able to look for and go after. And if you're starting where I'm going to go to an urban center, as in like each of you guys, like DFW is an urban center, then you can flow out of the urban center as your primary, here's where I'm going to start looking, urban center, and then flow out of that. I thought that was a really good conversation that everybody had, and kind of a aha moment for most everybody in the room as well. They're still going to wrestle with it. We're still all going to wrestle with it, because we're terrible at target in the United States. I'll speak for myself. I'm terrible at target in the United States, but I'm getting better at learning to do demographics and do research and find gaps, understand them better, see the city better. I mean, I'm definitely growing in that. So I was, more than anything else, I was super excited about that particular part. Of course, Bud's the one that led it. So that's why we all learned something.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about that a little bit, Dave? Just why you started the training the way you did with the teas that you started with, and any takeaways from starting it that way?
Well, the flow of the training that we did this time is I just kicked off everything we just had a really good season of prayer. Once we got everybody together, we let them all network kind of naturally and talk and those kind of things. Make sure I had coffee in everybody's hands and a snack so they would talk to each other. But then we just had a good opening season of prayer. And then we talked about what the 5 roles are in the way that I communicate the 5 roles of the seed sower, the church planner, the church plant multiplier, the movement trainer, and the strategy coordinator. And we talked about how at any given moment, those are the roles that a strategy coordinator is going to do depending upon the season that they're in, the needs of their target, whatever it may be. And then we talked about how, you should begin to fill those gaps. And then from there, we went straight into the 5 T's, which we started referring to as the stewardships. So I was using the 5 roles of the, seed sower through the strategy coordinator as what you're going to be doing. And then the 5 T's as the things that you need to be stewarding to make sure that the city and the target and the people that you're around and those that you're trying to team or teaming with understand you're facilitating those habits. And so we started with target when we went to the T's because we're just not real good at it. I use we in the royal sense, me, and I wanted other people to learn with me. And then we went from target straight down to tracking. And we spent time saying, if you're having a hard time tracking, it means you're having a hard time with your target. Your target isn't clear if you don't know what to track. And then we ended up taking all of those and folding them into the phases of where you are in terms of the work, right? Where you start off with adoption, and then you go to gospeling, and then you're going to a handful of believers, and then you're going to church, and then you're going to a few churches multiplying, and then multiple churches multiplying down the line. And we really focused in on those first 2 of adoption and gospeling because that's where the vast majority of people were in terms of the work or in terms of where they're trying to get started in the work. And so then as we went through tracking, we were saying, okay, what do you need to track in the stewardships that help you know what you need to be doing in the phase that you're in? And then what are you tracking in the stewardships that will help you get to the next phase? So we're like, what are 3 things you can track? And we kind of put head, heart, and hands. What is something you need to be doing? What's something you need to be learning? What's something you need in terms of your abiding and your character that's going to keep you in the race? And then from there, we went straight into teaming. And we wrapped all 3 of those together and started talking about how do you campaign your target, recognize the phase that you're in, and then start to do those 3 ways that you were talking about, Kyle, to get to movement in order to start building a wig take team and teaming around what needed to happen, and had a conversation around those 3 because we don't have everything figured out in training and tools. But in terms of the No Place Left community that I'm a part of, and we've been a part of, tools and training are something that we're more experienced in. I think the target, the tracking, and the teaming is where we need the most work. And so we were just focusing in on those things to let us really have plenty of time to just wrestle with those ideas.
And then you also, you put in pretty extensive just time in the Word around the teaming study up front. How did that go?
Yeah, because after we talked about the roles and we talked about the T's, we actually spent the entire first morning doing a coworker study from Paul's journeys. And so we just split up all of the major co-workers of Paul in the New Testament. We actually had every single one of them. And that study, you put all the pieces together and Mark explained it so that it was easy for people to follow. So they didn't just have a whole list of verses, but they actually had a little document to help guide the study. But we just took that document that you had, and then we took all of the slides that Carter put together, all 76 of them, about Paul's journeys that just mapped out the timeline of Acts, where the epistles fit, what cities he went to, what were the patterns that he did in each of the cities. And then at the back of that, it had the timeline of, when the timeline of the book of Acts and when the epistles were written and when Paul left on his first journey, his second journey, when the shipwreck happened, when the Roman imprisonment happened, when the Caesarea imprisonment happened. And we put all those pieces together. And as a group, we unpacked every coworker for Paul, starting pre-Antioch all the way through the end of the book of Acts, using all of the epistles. And then we mapped that out so that everybody could really see what a teamwork framework looked like. And we asked 4 questions around those. Where did Paul identify them? How did he equip them? What was the investment that they made in the kingdom during that time? And then when and where did Paul entrust them to the work whenever he wasn't there, kind of like, launch them off into the work. A big aha moment for that one, which I always love when we do that study, is how everybody recognizes that Titus was with Paul before Barnabas even came and got him for Antioch, that Titus was a Greek. He was uncircumcised, and he was doing church planting with Paul in Cilicia well before we even see Acts 13 begin to happen. And when everybody realized that Titus had been with Paul for about 30 years, it was kind of like one of those, whoa, we didn't realize that Paul's longest partner in the gospel had no Jewish background, which was pretty cool. And the vision cast, I did the vision cast really quickly. Mm-hmm. And then we just used the coworker study on Monday morning to cast the No Place Left vision, because I ended the coworker study on Troas Summit, because the one thing I wanted them to see was how crucial the Troas Summit was. And then I set up the Troas leaders but I helped them separate in their thinking that the Troas leaders were different than the Miletus elder meeting from Ephesus. And then since we had just done the coworker study, when we got to the Troas list, they had already done a study over all those people. And so then we just circled all the places on the big map that they had mapped out together in the debrief. And I was like, okay, here's where all the Troas leaders came from. And we went and circled all the cities, and we saw the lines and everything where they went. And then I told them that, clearly it's Luke's house. I mean, I don't know anybody would argue with me about that. Clearly they were hanging out at Luke's 3-story, physician's home in Troas. And that one really helped them to catch the vision. And then we dropped back and said, okay, why is he having this meeting? And why is he pulling them all together and talking all night long and giving them these last words? And then we dropped back into Romans 15:23 and said, just before the Troas Summit, where did he come from? And they had just mapped it. I was like, Achaia. Okay, what was he doing in Achaia? He was writing Romans. And so we used that study to cast the No Place Left vision, where we said the reason he's leaving is because look at this map, all the way from Jerusalem to Illyricum. There are lines, there's activity, there's leaders, there's resources, there's elders, there's all this. Do you guys see this map? And they said, yeah. And I said, do you understand why he would say there's no place left? And they were all like, yeah, he already had basically SC teams built, and it was time for him to go do it somewhere else. And I was like, yeah. And so we used that to cast the No Place Left vision. And we just kind of wrapped it all into the coworker study to save time, if that made any sense.
It does make sense. Yeah. Yeah.
It was on the board. I mean, the No Place Left, like what we say, Romans 15:23, when we cast that vision, it was like they were literally looking at it on the board. Mm-hmm. Jerusalem all the way around to Illyricum, because all those cities were already on the map. And they were like, this is just a networked mess. And we're like, no, it's a distributed, beautiful movement mess.
So that was kind of how you framed it up at the beginning. What was your vision cast at the end that drew it all together?
Yeah, the Troas Summit was my vision cast at the end,
That's
where I gave them that all. We went into Acts 20 and we read the list of leaders that were at Troas, and then for them to see that they knew where all those leaders came from, where they had been identified, how they'd been equipped, how they'd been investing in the kingdom, and where they were trusted, and then to just see that Paul's bringing these people together from all these cities, that he had developed all of these leaders, was the vision cast, where we were saying we want to see 1,000 SCs to get us started, to make us to the jump to 10,000 SCs. And that was the vision cast, to say, how do we get to a place to where we can say, look at all of our coworkers. Like, we need more coworkers, leaders that we can entrust with this task. So the core missionary task, the MPL vision, the SC vision cast was all wrapped into that study. I love it. I'm just being honest. I love that study. It is just getting more honed and more honed and more honed and more simple and more direct. And what we did is by the way, just sidebar, you can cut anything you want to. And if y'all tell me to stop talking, I will. It's fine, because I had a great time at the training.
Love it, man.
And just like you guys are going to tell me everything y'all learned in Las Vegas, and you won't stop talking about that, which will be a good thing. I had every single table take a big white sheet, like when we're using the big pads and hanging them up on the walls. I had every single table, no more than 4 at a table, because it was, if we got past 4, there were too many. So I said 3 to 4 at a table max. And I gave them one of those big white sheets, and I forced them to draw the whole map from Jerusalem around to Illyricum, to list all the cities, to put in all the islands, to label all Achaia, Galatia, Asia Minor, Macedonia, Cilicia, Judea, right? Syria. I made them build the entire map, and I gave them Carter's slides so they could see it. And I'd already put the map up on the whiteboard for them to see it, but I made everybody build that map. And then when they took their leader, I made them trace that leader throughout all of the map on their own. And then we hung every single leader's map on the wall that everybody did. And the number of times during the training that I was able to then turn around and go, okay, look back at the Luke map, look back at the Timothy map, look back at the Titus map, look back at and so we just had a wall full of Luke, Barnabas, Silas, Timothy, Priscilla and Aquila, Gaius, all these leaders, and the wall was just full of them. I think the number one thing from the coworker study is them having to draw the map. I had multiple people that came and said, I've always been scared to death to draw that map on the Acts 13 and 14 study. But you making us draw that map and actually draw the lines, us mapping it out ourselves instead of just trusting somebody else's map, was the most helpful thing for me to understand the timeline of Acts that I've ever done.
That's gold, man.
How many of us
really good?
How many of us learned by doing that? Like sitting down and literally, like at my house, I'm by myself in a notebook, drawing out this study myself the first time I ever did it, tracing these leaders. It was so helpful. And I thought, let's make them do it. And a bunch of them even said, I'm going to take this study and go and draw this map out myself. I hope they do.
I love it. What I like about what you framed up with how you started the training and then bringing in that piece of drawing out the map is you created just a framework that they're going to be able to go back and listen to all this content, look at the whiteboards, all of that stuff, but you created a framework for it all to hang on alongside of the 5 T's and the roles piece that they can go back as they're implementing and learning, and it can all fit within the biblical framework and within the T's that we've been using. That's really effective and helpful. It's good.
Yeah. And we took pictures and we PDF'd, and everything we did, whiteboards, maps, drawings, takeaways, schedule, modules, all of it is wrapped together in a Dropbox link that we can make available, at the bottom of this podcast. That will also have all the stuff that we did at DFW, Kyle. I wrapped all of it and put it all in that same drive. So I've got Oklahoma cities, and then I've got DFWs, and all that information's together. But I took all the information and I put it in kind of a war room document in a spreadsheet, and every single one of the modules that was taught on the schedule is now linked to the Dropbox file, or if it's not a Dropbox file, it's another one. But that way, whenever you're looking at that schedule, anybody can look at it and go, what was that they taught there, and click on it, and everything that they need is there. At the bottom of it is all the podcasts that we've done, all the videos that we have. And then below that is like, online resources to where, the one, Mark, that you put on the coworker study about Paul's journeys, where you can just move the map between ancient and modern. That tool for them to be able to swipe back and forth between an ancient and a modern map that quickly and that easily was also helpful for them to go, oh, so that's like in Turkey today. Oh, that's in, oh, I see where Syria is. And it really made it to where they're like, oh, Athens, oh, like Athens today. There's just a lot of, we spent 4 hours on it and they took every bit of it. You know what I mean?
That's good.
But all that information is accessible through that spreadsheet with the schedule, the Dropbox files at the top of it, all the modules, all the schedule are all linked. And at the bottom, all the extra resources that have already been there and done that we built upon. Like what I said, we didn't start from scratch. We just tweaked what we did in Dallas, Kyle. I mean, I was just messing with it a little bit to see. And I would love for people to keep messing with it so we can make it even better than what we did, which it won't be too hard. It won't be too hard.
Hey, Dave, I want to ask a question. Maybe you've shared a lot with that coworker study and some of those pieces, but if you could summarize, like what was the high value in bringing in that deep dive in the Word, and how did it establish the foundation for the rest of the training? If you could just kind of summarize that.
Yeah, the DNA for it is that the Word drives everything that we're doing. So that as we unpacked modules of any kind, we could go back to our study and the coworkers and go, look at where we see Paul doing activities similar to this. This is the way we're illustrating this activity of Paul. This is the way we're trying to help you get started with a method and a model that we see coworkers doing. This is a way that we're seeing entries into cities. This is the way that we're seeing exits out of cities. This is the way that we're seeing mid-level happening and leadership development happening. It was just a way for us to kind of go back and say, what we're talking about is something that we're trying to pull straight out of the book of Acts and just asking, how do we do the same things? And then, so that main crux is, DNA, just like if you do an intensive, we do an Acts 13 and 14 study at a minimum, and we're going to center everybody around that study and let them see it for themselves from the Bible, so that it's not man's word, it's God's word. And then the second piece of that was it lays the foundation for what I think is the core of the 5 T's, which is teaming, and helping us understand, especially in a Western culture, that whenever we think about this as an individual, we miss so much of what could happen. When we see this as a network of leaders, of coworkers that are all together trying to reach, in our case, the United States or Canada, if you wanted to go ahead and add that, but whatever it be, your city or it be your nation or it be your state, whatever framework you've got. I wanted to set up for them that the 5 T's are a stewardship. They're not an individual responsibility. They're something that a group of people are stewarding together on behalf of a city. And the more SCs that we have, the more we have help in stewarding these core categories for what needs to happen in order to reach an area, fill the gaps, whatever that area may be. Because I pounded
that's
team.
helpful.
We.
Well, tell me this, because it's, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel like what I'm hearing you say is that strategy coordinator role, that L5 function, is actually not a person function. It's an apostolic band.
It can start.
It's the team.
I don't mind putting those words in my mouth. If you're, like Will would say, if you don't have a we, then get started and go after a we. Like, you don't have to wait for the we to get started. But if an SC starts off and his mindset from the get-go isn't, how do I develop an apostolic core team that is a community of practice? And I think that, to me, that's the biggest thing. Is the number one reason that I'm still in the game today is because of the MPL community of practice, both locally and nationally and globally. Like you guys on this call, Mark was with me in the trenches, right, in Oklahoma City. Matt, we've been hanging out for, my gosh, since 2015, 2016. Kyle, I'm not sure when I met you, but it feels like I've known you since I was 8 years old, right? So it's those guys that have made it to where I'm still in the game on what we're doing. And there just seems to me to be an element that's a little bit different, where, yes, I'm in a local church, and a lot of the SCs that we're trying to train and release, and we're seeing trained and released in Oklahoma City, actually go to church with me. But we function on a little bit of a different behavior than necessarily everybody in our church. I'll give I don't mean to go too far into this, but a really good example. A girl in our church just sent me a text message actually a couple of days ago where she said, "Hey, is it okay if I bring 6 people to church Sunday morning and don't know anything about No Place Left or Four Fields or whatever?" And our problem in Oklahoma City is not how do we get people to be SCs. Our problem in Oklahoma City is how do we make our church gatherings open for people who are just exploring the things of Christianity, so that when they come in, they're not just like, "Oh my gosh, I'm nothing like these people. How do I even get there?" So that Todd Angstrom language from Austin Stone about first decision and second decision communities is super helpful for me, because you've got some people that are coming in there exploring Jesus and just wanting to learn what it means to follow him, and they haven't quite caught the NPL, fill the gap, go after it, strategy coordinator kind of vision just yet. But they're vital to everything we're doing in terms of the work of Christ, and where they grow and where they're trained and where they marinate is in the church. But if you fill a church with nothing but a bunch of SC type guys and girls, then you don't have a place for those emerging future leaders to really cut their teeth and grow. And so I think that it's helpful to have kind of a community of practice that's going to go around that idea of filling the gaps and act like, I'll use the word missionaries, but an apostolic band. It's just helpful.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Appreciate you clarifying that, man.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Thanks, Dave.
Roll 3X music.